In today's episode of the Pathmark Presents podcast, I got a very interesting guest here with me today. I'm with Mallory Green, and she's hailing over from the folks over at AtData. And in the end, AtData is about unlocking intelligence about the person behind any email address, right? So if you're a marketer out there, a salesperson out there, of course, emails are your bread and butter to get your message out into the world. Today we want to talk about AtDigital. So Mallory, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Sure. So maybe give people like a brief overview. What is AtData all about in your own words?
Yeah, so AtData, we're the email address experts, the leader in email address intelligence. We have the most accurate, comprehensive, and privacy compliant email-centric data solutions available on the market. We not only validate and verify our customers' first-party data, but we also enable them to develop actionable customer profiles where from there they can assess risk and improve their marketing efforts using just a single email identifier. That usually helps them decrease costs, maximize revenue, minimize fraud. And, in this day and age when we're so entranced in digital, and the email address is really that identifier that ties all of our online profiles together. And there's a lot of privacy and compliance and data rules that are out there right now. It's important for you to maximize your first party data. And, we help our customers do that.
Makes a whole lot of sense. Now, basically tell us a little bit about the companies. What are the types of organizations that benefit most from, AtData, you would say?
So to be very broad, pretty much any company that collects consumer data. I think we see the most success in industries like retail and e-commerce. Fraud orchestration platforms is some conversations that we're having right now. Subscription companies, so like your Netflix, your HelloFresh, and financial services are places where we feel that we see the largest size companies come in. And these are whether you're a digital bank and you're collecting email addresses during onboarding, or you're a retail e-commerce and you're having people fill out forms on your website or build accounts or profiles using an email address from there. The fraud orchestration platforms, email is like 40% of online fraud can be detected just from an email address. And so by incorporating our solutions into your orchestration platform, so your waterfall, like we're going to check here, it eliminates that risk before it gets all the way down to the bottom where essentially your more expensive platforms are sitting. And we help determine not only if that email address is correct from like a syntax perspective, but also identify if it's deliverable, even toxic or risky. And we collect billions of signals every month to layer on key demographic and behavioral data to help provide a more personalized experience. So that's from a marketer's perspective, right? So this helps marketing departments with their omni-channel outreach efforts, whether it's an email marketing program or your audience targeting or your retargeting efforts. It's all about deliverability and making sure that all that effort that you're putting into your marketing campaigns is actually reaching its intended audience.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a whole lot of sense. Now, tell me, who would be the champion typically? Would that be sort of like a sales lead that is building out outbound? Would that be a marketing lead? Like, who is sort of that one champion that holds the flag high
Yeah,
for it?
yeah, it definitely changes based on the industry that we're seeing as well as the use case itself. So from a marketing perspective, I mean, we typically are seeing our champions or our decision makers with director level and above title, but I actually have the SDR department that reports into me. And so I always tell them like, hey, I worked for a really small company at one point and my title was manager, but I was the person who was making that decision. And I was actually the person who ended up signing. It's just sometimes there's like semantics that are part of it too. So it's all about really understanding and doing your due diligence about the marketplace and who your consumers are. So you can ensure that the outreach that you're providing to them actually speaks to their pain points, addresses them, and shows how we benefit and can help them solve their problems. So if you're looking at a marketing department, often you'll see like an email marketer. So the message that we give to an email marketer would be very different than one that we would give to like someone who's in charge of paid media or audience targeting or something along those lines. which would also be very different than what we would provide to a vice president of marketing, because they're typically overseeing everything. So it's really about understanding how we solve for specific use cases within each industry. And the champions, I think, are almost secondary, because if you do a good job reaching out with the right message to a whole bunch of people, especially in a B2B space, it's those individual touch points that all matter, because the CEO at my company might get a message that is marketing related and say, hey, that's really interesting. And then he would forward it to me to kind of review and look further into. So I really think it's just about knowing who kind of has influence as well as buying power and can make that decision within whatever organization that you're trying to, tap into.
Gotcha. Makes a lot of sense. Now, how do people learn about AtData? How would you describe the journey getting to know you guys?
Yeah, so we're actually kind of at the tail end of a rebrand. And so that's actually been a little bit of a struggle, right? So you're merging two companies together and then rebranding into AtData. We merged Tower Data and Fresh Address together. And this is where AtData came from, right? And so we do see a lot of our direct return on investment come from things like conferences, direct hand raisers to our website. So contact us forms, as well as webinars. But I really truly believe in like that omni-channel experience, and kind of each single touch point has its place within, the marketing campaign or the marketing strategy. So even if you don't see a lot of direct revenue come from something like a display ad on a trade publication, that messaging still matters, and you're still driving them back to your website where then they could convert into something else. Or you're doing all of those things and then you meet them at a conference, and like that's where you're able to have that conversation. And same with webinars. So when I think about that question in terms of what channels lead to the most conversations as like last touch, those are typically the three, because each channel is important in its own way, and it all matters in the whole strategy of it all.
That makes sense. Now, how do you think then about the website? Like what role does it play? How do you, what's the strength of the website at the moment versus where do you see room maybe for further development? What's your take on the website?
Yeah, so as I said, we're going through a bit of a rebrand, and a lot of that comes with understanding our audience and our market from these two companies that we've now merged together, and really diving into what that customer experience looks like. As a marketer, I firmly believe in a very thought-provoking, customer experience focused, answers all of your questions website. You don't want something that's so over the top that it becomes almost obtrusive into like what you're trying to do from a research perspective. But it needs, when you land on that website, it's so important that it gives off the same look, feel as the messaging that you're providing as well. So if it all doesn't align, or it feels like there's maybe a little bit of a misstep, that, in my opinion, is like the first thing that needs to be fixed, because you could be putting all of this effort into the messaging that your sales development reps are putting out or your account executives are putting out. And this is all from a B2B perspective, but it could make complete sense to them. And then they could click on your website, and your website doesn't translate to what you're putting out in your other channels. It's almost like a surefire way for people to leave. And so it's so critical that whatever you put on your site really is that message and that customer experience you're trying to deliver across all channels, because that's where you want people to end up. And even from a conversion rate perspective, if someone fills out a form on your site, I mean, they've done all of their due diligence. And so the chances of that lead converting over one that's maybe just like pure cold that comes from an SDR or an account executive is much higher. So a lot of emphasis needs to be placed on the website and what it can do for your marketing strategy.
Gotcha. Very, very cool. Now, tell us a little bit more about your role. Like, you mentioned you got a very interesting background there. Now, yeah. What's the things that you're up to at AtData at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm the VP of marketing here at AtData. I come from a background that was pretty much rooted in operations. So very heavy on the technology side of the house, the measurement, the metrics, understanding what channels are converting. And what we're working on right now is pretty much what I've said, is this rebrand and getting our name out there and creating a lot of brand awareness campaigns. So people are thinking of us when the conversation comes up. When you're taking two companies that are rooted in like 20 years of history and then bringing them together, changing their name, I mean, it creates a lot of confusion and maybe just a little, I don't know if FUD is the right way to think about it, but just a lot of, so what happened? Did you do this for XYZ reasons? And it's like, no, we did it because we knew that bringing our companies together would create the best solution on the market, just based on the products that we had for each of us and how they can integrate within each other. Very strong engineering and technology teams in order to pull all of that together. So my role here right now is to build that brand awareness. When I started, I only had a team of 2 people, 3 people, and I've now grown that to 8. So I have some branding and creative where that's their specialty. And now we're focusing on the technology as well, and working really hard to align marketing, sales, and products together to make sure that as things as are coming out into the market, that however we're talking about it and how we're speaking about AtData is very similar and streamlined across all of the teams.
Gotcha. Very cool. Super interesting. Now, as we slowly moving towards the end of the interview, I'd have some rapid fire questions for you. Are you ready for those?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Very good. I'd be curious, like, what would be the last book that you read or the last podcast you listened to?
So I read a lot. I read a book called Kindred. That was the last one that I don't read a lot of professional books in my free time. Like, reading is kind of my time to myself. So I lean more towards fiction, and I read a lot of true crime and suspense thriller books, which I think every person on the planet is probably doing at this point. But I try and read 2 books a month. I try and switch them up. So Kindred is the last book that I just read. And then from a podcast perspective, I listen to a podcast called Smartless a lot. It's they actually just did an HBO documentary about it too. It's Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and I can't remember the other host's name, but it's interesting, it's entertaining, it's lighthearted. So when I'm driving around, it just kind of is a good way for me to, unwind from my day. So.
Very nice.
Yeah.
What would you say would be the one thing that you focused on the most at AtData?
The one thing that I focus on the most. I think it's implementation of process. And that's just my experience and where I feel the most success comes from. Because if you're very programmatic in the way that you go to market, and you're very programmatic about the way that you build your marketing campaigns, and the way that your sales and your marketing team aligns with what your product team is putting out, you don't want to miss anything. So when it's a very small company or 2 very small companies coming together, and they're pretty much like boots to the ground, like pull up your bootstraps, like let's just get this done. And that worked really well for them. But as the team grows and the business scales, that becomes where process is more important, and you need to really focus in on that. So I think that's probably where I spend most of my time, is just making sure that no steps are missed and we're doing everything so we don't have to like go back and redo it. I mean, no one likes that, right? So it's all about work efficiencies.
That makes sense. Very last question. If today would be your very first day at AtData, what's the one single point or piece of advice that you would give yourself?
Don't try and boil the ocean. I think I'm naturally an overachiever. I step into a situation and see everything that's been done really well and really great, and how we can scale that. And then, some things that we can build upon. And sometimes I tend to take on a little bit too much, and it almost gives you like analysis paralysis, right? So there's so much on your list that you're like, I don't even really know where to start. And then you almost get a little disappointed that you don't achieve all of the things that you want. So I think it's maybe just being a little more realistic and not feeling like I have to, solve world peace. And in the first 3 months that I start a job, it's not about that. It's kind of a marathon instead of a sprint.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Very good. Mallory, I really appreciate you took the time with us today to be a guest on Pathwing Presents. I want to give you the last word. If people would be forgetting all that we discussed about AtData, what's the thing that they should remember?
I think that we are the best verification, validation, email intelligence address solution available. If you're doing digital marketing, which all of us are doing, we not only will verify and validate the email addresses that you provide to us, but we'll help throughout the customer journey. So when that data is ingested, as it's sitting in your CRM, and CRMs decay at like 6% a year. So as it's sitting in your CRM, and then as you're going through retargeting efforts or even through customer retention, like everything is focused so much on that email address. It's not just about the validation and the verification, which I think all of us understand the concept of that, right? Like you get a list of email addresses, you put it in, it tells you if, the syntax is wrong, someone fat fingered the email address. It tells you if it's a spam trap. It tells you if it's a honeypot. It tells you like this might be a dangerous domain, but then it's like, what happens after that? And that's where we are different on the market from our competition, is we are there from beginning to end throughout the entire customer journey, especially from a marketing perspective, because as that email address sits in your database, things change, your database decays. And so, especially if you are in an industry where it's like high ticket items that are infrequently purchased, it's really important for you to understand like what you have worked so hard to collect needs to remain fresh and accurate. And we help throughout that entire process. And it's important and it's critical for you to incorporate us into, from beginning to end, from acquisition to retention. So
thanks a lot for being a guest on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.